My Uncle David hauled my 3 suitcases out the front door and threw them onto the frozen Michigan driveway, right as the last funeral guests drove away. He stood on the porch in his tailored morning suit and announced that my 5 years of nursing my grandfather meant nothing because the estate now belonged to the men of the family. My brother Ryan watched from the doorway with his arms crossed, fully endorsing my banishment into the freezing winter night for a promised cut of the sale. What they did not know was that 2 years ago, my grandfather quietly brought his private estate attorney to the house and legally transferred the deed of this $800,000 property solely into my name. By throwing my belongings into the snow, they had just turned themselves into criminal trespassers and stepped blindly into an eviction trap they could never escape. My name is Sarah. I am 26 years old and I am the legal owner of this estate. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from and what your local time is down in the comments. Hit like and subscribe to Sweet Life Drama if you have ever been treated like a disposable workhorse by your own blood. Trust me, you will want to hear exactly how I dragged them out of my house and watched their greed destroy them. The temperature was hovering near -10 degrees. The wind coming off the lake felt like shattered glass against my face. I stood at the bottom of the porch steps and watched my own clothes spill out of a cracked zipper. Dark fabric soaked up the wet sludge of the driveway. Just 2 hours earlier, we had been standing at a gravesite. I had arranged the service. I had paid the funeral home. I had picked out the flowers. David and Ryan had merely shown up to drink the catered coffee and shake hands. Now David stood blocking the front entrance, his breath plumed in the yellow porch light. He adjusted his expensive silk tie, but his face softened into a mask of deep, manufactured pity. He reached out and gently placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Sarah, you look so exhausted, sweetheart," David said. His voice was thick with fake sympathy, the kind that makes your skin crawl. "You sacrificed your 20s to nurse my father. You did your duty. But now it is time for the men of the family to lift this heavy burden off your shoulders. You need to go out and finally live your life." He squeezed my shoulder, a physical threat disguised as a loving embrace. "Ryan and I are putting the house on the market Monday morning to settle the estate," he continued, his tone turning softly patronizing. "We will make sure you get a little something for your trouble once the dust settles. But tonight, I think it is best you find a friend's couch. This house is just too full of sad memories for you right now." I shifted my gaze to Ryan. My older brother leaned against the doorframe, whistling a cheerful, off-key tune while his thumb swiped through a gallery of brand-new Porsche listings on his phone screen. He did not even look up as my clothes froze on the wet driveway. The impending $50,000 payout had completely insulated him from my reality. Next to Ryan stood his wife, Chloe. Her dark skin caught the harsh porch light, her brow furrowed in genuine distress. She wore a heavy black wool coat over her funeral dress. She stepped forward, her heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floor. "Ryan, what are you doing?" Chloe demanded, her voice cut through the freezing air. "It is -10 degrees outside. She gave up her medical illustration career to keep him out of a nursing home. You cannot just throw her into the street." She reached out and grabbed Ryan by the sleeve. He yanked his arm back so hard she stumbled a half step. "This is family business, Chloe." Ryan snapped. He did not even look at her. He kept his eyes locked on me. "She got free rent for 5 years. The ride is over." Chloe looked at me. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of apology and shock. I gave her a microscopic shake of my head, a silent signal. Do not fight them for me. I did not scream. I did not drop to my knees and beg for a night inside. Crying requires warmth, and the cold was already seeping through my thin dress shoes. I just looked at David. I looked at the man who had visited his father exactly 3 times in half a decade, always with a question about the will. My right hand rested deep inside my coat pocket. My fingertips traced the sharp folded edges of a thick paper envelope. Inside that envelope was the official county stamp deed to the property. It had been sitting in my safe box for 24 months. Grandfather had seen this exact night coming. He knew his son. He knew his grandson. He knew they would circle like vultures the second his heart stopped beating. "Keep the house warm, David," I said. My voice was quiet. It did not shake. I turned my back on them. walked over the scattered clothes, and picked up the smallest bag. I left the rest of my belongings freezing in the snow. I unlocked the door of my rusted sedan, climbed into the driver's seat, and turned the ignition. The engine sputtered before catching. As I shifted into reverse, my headlights swept across the porch. David was already turning the deadbolt. He was locking himself inside my house. I pressed my foot on the gas and drove into the dark street. I had $14 in my bank account. I had nowhere to sleep. But as I watched the house disappear in the rearview mirror, my pulse was steady. They thought they had just thrown out the hired help. They had no idea they had just initiated a felony. The dashboard clock read 6:14 in the morning. Frost coated the inside of the windshield, tracing jagged patterns across the glass. I woke up shivering, my neck cramped at a sharp angle against the driver's side window of the sedan. My breath formed tight white clouds in the cabin. The heater core in this car had died 2 winters ago. The 7-Eleven parking lot was empty, except for a delivery truck idling near the dumpsters, its exhaust mixing with the gray dawn. I uncurled my stiff fingers, rubbing warmth into my palms, and reached for the ignition. Before I could turn the key, my phone screen illuminated the dark console. Motion detected, front parlor camera. Then another notification stacked on top of it. Motion detected, studio interior. I did not own a cloud subscription for the security system. Grandpa preferred closed-circuit feeds with hard drives hidden in the floorboards. 2 years ago, I installed hidden wide-angle lenses integrated into the smoke detectors. He wanted peace of mind while the nurses rotated shifts. I wanted a permanent record of who came and went. I tapped the notification. The live feed buffered for a fraction of a second before the high-definition image materialized. The room on the screen used to be a ground-floor master suite. It was the exact spot where I spent 60 months monitoring oxygen tanks, administering medication, and adjusting morphine drips. After the funeral home took his body away, I scrubbed the floors and converted the space into my medical illustration studio. Now, standing in the center of my meticulously organized workspace were 3 men wearing unmarked gray work jackets. They held sledgehammers, heavy canvas drop cloths, and pry bars. David stood near the doorway. He wore a tailored wool coat over a cashmere sweater, holding a steaming cup of coffee in a ceramic mug. He pointed toward the load-bearing wall separating the studio from the living room, issuing a command. Ryan stepped into the frame, handing one of the day laborers a roll of heavy-duty trash bags. My brother was grinning, gesturing broadly at the built-in bookshelves. I watched the screen as the tallest laborer stepped up to the drywall. He swung a 20-pound hammer directly into the center of the wall. The sound crackled through the phone speaker, a sharp, concussive thud, followed by the hiss of crumbling plaster. Dust plumed into the air, settling over my drafting table and my reference library. The destruction was systematic, fast, and ruthless. One worker grabbed my primary workstation monitor, a customized Wacom Cintiq Pro display tablet I had saved 18 months to purchase. He did not unplug the power cables or detach the display cords. He yanked the heavy screen forward, snapping the connection ports right out of the motherboard, and tossed the $3,000 device into a plastic bin. The glass shattered against the rigid plastic rim with a sickening crunch. In the freezing cabin of my car, a jagged sob tore out of my throat. I pressed my icy hands over my mouth, trying to stifle the sound as a hot, desperate rush of tears blurred the screen. That monitor was connected to the local backup drives containing hundreds of hours of my medical drafts. The sheer, suffocating panic of losing my entire career in a single careless swing of a hammer hit me so hard my vision swam. For a terrifying minute, I was completely broken, shivering violently in a dead car, paralyzed by the cruelty of my own family. I let the tears fall, letting the raw devastation crash over me. Then I forced myself to take a deep, jagged breath. I wiped my face with my stiff sleeve, the sorrow instantly hardening into absolute glacial rage. Ryan walked over to the anatomical reference shelves. I specialize in surgical reconstructions and textbook visuals, requiring precise physical references to ensure accuracy. Sitting on the top tier was a medical-grade, disarticulated human skeleton model imported from Germany. Beside it sat 6 custom-cast resin mandibles used for dental implant illustrations. Ryan did not pack them away. He swept his forearm across the shelf. The models crashed onto the hardwood floor. The delicate jawbone splintered into pieces. The skull rolled into a pile of crushed drywall, its hinge cracked. David took a sip of his coffee, unbothered by the noise. He gestured toward the custom oak cabinetry framing the western window. "Rip it all out." His voice filtered through the audio feed, tinny but clear. "We need an open concept floor plan to attract cash buyers. Clear out the junk. Today." Down to the studs for a quick flip. They viewed my career, my livelihood, and my grandfather's sanctuary as mere debris standing between them and a real estate commission. The phone vibrated in my palm, minimizing the video feed to a small thumbnail in the corner. A text message appeared from Chloe. "Sarah, I am so sorry. Ryan locked me out of the house. He hired an off-the-books demo crew. They are gutting the ground floor. He refused to listen to me. They are throwing away your equipment. Please call the police. I am taking a cab to my mother's place." I stared at the glowing letters. Chloe was panicking, watching her husband cross a line of no return. I typed a response using fingers that ached from the freezing temperature. "Do not intervene. Go to your mother's house. Stay safe." I did not tell her to call the police. I did not dial 911. Instead, I tapped back into the security application interface and pressed the record button. A red circle blinked in the upper right corner of the screen. I sat in the freezing car, watching my own home being torn apart board by board, and I let the recording run. At 9:30, I walked into the law offices of Sterling and Pierce. The receptionist took one look at my wrinkled funeral dress and pale face before ushering me directly into the back corridor. Attorney Sterling sat behind a mahogany desk stacked with manila folders. He was a veteran estate lawyer who had known my grandfather for 3 decades. He possessed the sharp, uncompromising demeanor of a man who dealt exclusively in facts and contracts. I did not offer a greeting. I placed my phone on his desk, turned the volume up, and pressed play. Sterling leaned forward, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. He watched the sledgehammers tear through the plaster. He watched the laborers toss thousands of dollars of medical illustration equipment into dumpsters. He watched David sip his coffee while overseeing the ruin. The color drained from the lawyer's face, replaced by a flush of profound indignation. He reached for the brass landline receiver on his desk. "I am calling the county sheriff," Sterling said. His voice possessed a low, dangerous gravel. "This is home invasion. It is breaking and entering. I will have patrol cars in that driveway in 4 minutes." I reached across the mahogany and pressed my fingers down on the receiver hook, cutting the dial tone. Sterling looked up, his brow furrowed in stark confusion. "Sarah, they are destroying your property. They are dismantling your business." "Exactly," I replied. My tone was flat, devoid of the panic he expected to see. Sterling removed his hand from the phone. He studied my face, searching for a trace of shock or hysteria.
"You own the deed, Sarah. You have the legal right to halt this instantly. Why are we sitting here watching them swing hammers?"
"If we send squad cars right now," I explained, looking down at the video feed, "the sheriff will arrive to find a broken wall and a ruined monitor. David will play the victim. He will tell the officers it is a familial dispute over an unclear inheritance. He will claim he thought the house was his and he was just doing renovations. The police hate family disputes. They will write a generic incident report, tell us to sort it out in civil court, and leave." Sterling remained silent, the gears of his legal mind turning over my words. He knew the local precincts. He knew how easily a smooth-talking businessman like David could charm a deputy into viewing a crime scene as a simple misunderstanding. "Right now, the damage is hovering around $4,000 or $5,000, I continued, pointing at the screen. "That is a misdemeanor threshold in a messy probate argument. But if they take down the entire load-bearing structure, if they gut the electrical wiring, if they destroy $20,000 worth of specialized medical equipment, it stops being a family misunderstanding." The realization dawned in Sterling's eyes.
The rigid line of his jaw relaxed into something resembling grim respect. It becomes a high-level felony, he stated. First-degree property damage, I confirmed. Criminal trespass, grand theft. I want them to cross the felony threshold so far that no judge in this state can reduce the charges to a slap on the wrist. I want the damage to be undeniable. Sterling picked up a gold-plated pen and tapped it against the legal pad. He looked at the phone, then back to me. Your uncle is arrogant. He assumes he holds all the cards because you drove away last night. Let him assume, I said. Let him spend his own cash paying a black market crew to demolish a room he does not own. Let him sign the dumpster rental agreements. Let Ryan carry the debris out to the curb for the neighbors to witness. Every swing of that hammer is another count on the indictment. We sat together in the quiet office. On the small screen resting between us, Ryan kicked a shattered piece of the German anatomical model across the room, laughing at something David said. They were so confident in their theft, so secure in their perceived dominance, they did not realize they were excavating their own prison cells. I watched the dust settle over the ruins of my studio, calculating the exact moment the trap would snap shut. The diner smelled of burnt filter coffee and industrial floor cleaner. I sat in a cracked vinyl booth near the back, wrapping my hands around a ceramic mug just to absorb the heat. It was my second morning sleeping in the sedan, and the cold had settled deep into my joints. I needed a warm space to charge my phone and figure out a plan to salvage my destroyed equipment. The waitress, a woman named Barb who had known my grandfather for 20 years, slid a laminated check across the table. $4.15. I pulled my debit card from my coat pocket and handed it to her. I watched her walk over to the register and swipe the magnetic strip. The machine emitted a sharp, discordant tone. She frowned, wiped the card on her apron, and swiped it again. Same tone. Barb walked back to the booth. Her eyes held a mixture of pity and discomfort. It is declining, Sarah, she said, keeping her voice low to prevent the truckers at the counter from hearing. The screen says the account is frozen. I took the card back. The plastic felt heavy. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking application. The loading circle spun for 3 seconds. When the dashboard appeared, my checking and savings balances were replaced by a single line of red text. Administrative hold. Contact branch manager. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a $5 bill from my meager cash reserves, and placed it on the table. Keep the change, Barb, I said. I stood up, walked out into the freezing wind, and climbed back into my car. I had exactly $14 left to my name. I dialed the local branch number instead of the generic customer service line. After 3 rings, a junior teller answered, her voice tight with discomfort. She transferred me directly to the branch manager, Arthur Vance. Arthur was a man who played 18 holes of golf with my uncle every Sunday. Sarah, I am sorry, Arthur said, though his tone carried the distinct grease of corporate self-preservation. Your Uncle David came into the branch at 8 this morning. He flagged your checking account for suspicious activity pending a probate review. I gripped the steering wheel. That account contains only my personal income from my medical illustration business, I said, keeping my voice dangerously level. David has no legal authority over my finances. Technically, he found a loophole, Arthur replied smoothly. That checking account was opened 12 years ago as a student joint account with your grandfather. You never removed his name as a secondary holder. David is claiming you misappropriated his father's funds while acting as his caregiver. He filed a formal fraud affidavit. My grandfather passed away 3 days ago, I countered. Any power of attorney David holds is legally dead. You cannot freeze my personal income based on a baseless accusation without a court order, Arthur. I am treating this as an internal fraud investigation regarding a deceased client's linked assets, Arthur stated, the polished facade slipping to reveal his allegiance to my uncle's commercial accounts. The funds are frozen until the police or a judge tells me otherwise. Have a good day, Sarah. The line went dead. David had discovered the empty estate accounts. My grandfather had moved his liquid assets into an inaccessible trust months ago, anticipating this exact scenario. Instead of accepting the reality, David panicked. He weaponized his country club connections and an outdated bank technicality to cut off my oxygen. It was a calculated financial strangulation. He wanted to starve me into submission. I ended the call. The engine idled, blowing lukewarm air through the vents. Before I could shift into gear, my phone vibrated. A text from a fellow medical illustrator who lived one town over. "Sarah, are you seeing what your brother is posting? You need to look at the community page right now." I opened the Facebook application. The local community group, a digital bulletin board usually reserved for lost pets and zoning complaints, was dominated by a post from Ryan. "It breaks my heart to share family matters publicly," the post began, "but our community deserves the truth. While my father and I were grieving the loss of our grandfather, we discovered that my sister Sarah has been quietly emptying his retirement accounts. We trusted her to care for him. Instead, she took advantage of a dying man. We had to make the agonizing decision to remove her from the house to protect what little is left of our family's legacy. Please keep our father in your prayers. He is devastated by this betrayal." I scrolled through the comments. The venom was immediate and unsparing. Neighbors I had waved to for years tore my character to shreds. "I always knew there was something off about her," wrote the woman who ran the local bakery. "Elder abuse is the lowest of the low. She belongs in jail," added a contractor who used to bowl with Ryan. "Praying for your dad, Ryan. Stay strong." Then, halfway down the thread, a new comment popped up. It was from Chloe. "This is a lie," she wrote. "You people do not know the truth. Sarah gave up everything to care for him, while you two did nothing. Ryan, take this down right now." I watched the screen. 30 seconds passed. I refreshed the page. Chloe's comment vanished. Ryan had deleted it. A moment later, I checked the group member list. Chloe's name was gone. He had blocked his own wife to maintain his narrative. My email notification chimed, then another, then a third. I switched over to my inbox. The first message was from the lead editor of a university press in Chicago. "Sarah," the email read, "we just received a deeply concerning message from your grandfather's email account, operated by your brother Ryan. Given the serious allegations of financial elder abuse attached with what appear to be bank statements, we are forced to terminate our vendor relationship immediately to avoid any legal liabilities." I felt a cold drop of dread hit my stomach. Grandpa's old iPad. It was sitting on his bedside table, and I had forgotten to log out of my synced business contact list after managing his medical portals. Ryan had not just posted a lie in a local community group. He had systematically harvested my professional network. The second email was from a local surgical clinic. My career, built over 5 years of meticulous late-night drafting and relentless networking, was dissolving in front of my eyes. They were not just taking my home, they were ensuring I could not afford to exist anywhere else. I sat in the rusted sedan, the winter wind rattling the door panels. I looked at the $14 resting in the cup holder, 2 $5 bills and 4 singles. That was the entirety of my net worth. The pressure in my chest tightened, a heavy, suffocating weight pressing against my ribs. The instinct to scream, to drive back to the house and shatter the front windows pulsed through my veins. I picked up the $14, folded the bills, and slipped them into my coat pocket. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the freezing air fill my lungs until the panic receded, replaced by a cold, sharpened clarity. They wanted to play a public game. They wanted to use the town as a weapon. They had just given me the exact blueprint for their own execution. The heater in the sedan sputtered, blowing lukewarm air against my numb fingers. I sat parked 2 blocks down from the estate, the engine idling low. A white and red real estate sign staked into the front lawn dominated the view. Open house, estate sale. The bold lettering stood out against the fresh layer of morning snow. These were not neighbors coming to pay their respects to my grandfather. These were bargain hunters, drawn by the promise of discounted antiques and a quick property flip. I saw a stranger hauling a stack of vintage medical textbooks, the ones my grandfather had bought for me when I first started my illustration business. A woman in a thick parka walked down the driveway, carrying the brass reading lamp that used to sit on his nightstand, letting the cord drag through the wet snow. She handed Ryan a wad of cash. Ryan stuffed the green bills into his jacket pocket without even bothering to count them. He stood on the porch, a steaming paper cup in one hand, laughing with two guys I recognized from his high school days. He pointed to the roof, gesturing wide, painting a picture of his impending wealth. David orchestrated the larger chaos from the center of the lawn. He wore a tailored charcoal overcoat, his polished leather shoes sinking slightly into the snow. He played the gracious host, the responsible executor, liquidating a heavy burden. He smiled, nodding solemnly, selling the bones of the house while ignoring the history bleeding out of it. Then the dynamic on the porch shifted. Chloe stepped out the front door. She did not look like she was hosting a lucrative family event. She looked exhausted, her dark eyes scanning the yard with deep disgust. Ryan turned to her.
He held out his empty hand, expecting her to hand over the cash. He snapped his fingers, a sharp, demanding gesture that treated his wife like an employee. She reached behind her waist and untied the apron strings. She pulled the canvas over her head. The heavy fabric, loaded with coins and bills, swung through the air. She threw it directly into Ryan's chest. The apron hit him hard. Coins spilled out, clattering across the wooden porch boards, rolling over the edge and disappearing into the snow. "This is theft, Ryan," she said, her words slicing through the crisp air. "You are robbing her, and you are acting like you won the lottery. I am done. Do not call me." She turned her back on him and walked down the porch steps. She did not look back at the house or the scattered coins. David had watched the entire exchange from the lawn. His polite salesman smile vanished, replaced by a tight, rigid line across his jaw. He marched down the driveway, his leather shoes crunching heavy and fast against the packed snow. He did not walk on the sidewalk. He walked straight down the middle of the street, his eyes fixed on my windshield. David reached my car. He grabbed the top edge of the half-open window with bare hands. He leaned down, bringing his face level with mine. "You think you are proving a point," David said. "You are just proving you have nowhere else to go." He shoved the folded paper through the gap in the window. It landed on my lap. "The house is being sold. The open house is packed. We have 2 cash offers already. You are finished here, Sarah. You are a failure. Stop circling the property like a vulture and move on." I reached down and picked up the paper. I folded it neatly in half, matching the corners with slow, deliberate precision. I folded it again, creating a tight, crisp square. "Are you done talking, David?" I asked. My voice was calm, carrying no anger, no sorrow, no fear. He narrowed his eyes. "I am telling you to leave." "Keep the receipts," I said. David frowned. "What?" "The demolition crew, the dumpster rentals, the estate sale broker fees, the real estate agent commission. Make sure you keep every single receipt." I reached for the ignition key. I turned it, and the engine roared to life. "Because you will need them for the police report," I replied. I shifted the car into drive. I drove away, leaving him standing in the middle of the freezing street, staring at my taillights. I drove 3 blocks before I pulled over. I pressed the call button and listened to it ring. Sterling answered on the second ring. I gave him a 3-word update. They crossed the line. He told me to meet him at the county precinct in 20 minutes. The county sheriff department sat on the edge of the municipal district, a brutalist block of concrete and frosted glass surrounded by snowplows and patrol cruisers. The heating system rattled in the ceiling of the lobby. Sterling was already waiting on a plastic chair. He wore a dark wool suit and carried a thick leather briefcase. He did not ask how I was feeling. He did not offer empty sympathies. He just nodded toward the heavy metal double doors leading to the investigations wing. We walked past rows of empty desks to a glass-walled office in the back. The nameplate on the desk read, Sheriff Brody. Brody was a tall man with silver hair cut close to the scalp. He had been policing this county for 2 decades. He knew the local players. He knew the politicians, the business owners, and the men who wore tailored coats to hide cheap character. He knew my Uncle David well. Brody poured black coffee from a glass carafe into a styrofoam cup and sat behind his desk. He looked at me, taking in the wrinkled coat and the exhaustion carving lines under my eyes.
Then he looked at my lawyer. "What brings the best estate attorney in the county into my office on the Saturday morning?" Brody asked, setting the coffee down. Sterling unlatched his briefcase. He did not offer a preamble or a polite greeting. He pulled out my secondary tablet and set it flat on the metal desk. He tapped the screen. The security footage from yesterday morning began to play. The sledgehammers hitting the drywall. The crunch of the specialized Wacom display shattering against the plastic bin. The medical-grade skeletal models turning to dust under heavy work boots. Ryan laughing. David sipping coffee and issuing demolition orders to the unlicensed crew. Brody leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk, the blue light from the tablet reflected in his eyes. The ambient noise of the police station seemed to fade, replaced by the rhythmic thud of the hammers coming through the tablet speakers. Brody frowned, a deep crease forming between his eyebrows. "Property destruction," he noted, his voice turning official and dry. "If they are tearing down walls without pulling municipal permits, you need code enforcement. If it is an inheritance dispute over the grandfather's estate, you need a civil judge. I hate family probate fights, Sterling. You know that."
Why are you bringing this to a criminal precinct? Sterling reached into his briefcase a second time. He withdrew a heavy cream-colored envelope with the county seal stamped across the flap. He slid it across the metal surface. It stopped right next to Brody's coffee cup. "Read it," Sterling instructed. Brody wiped his hands on his trousers and flipped the envelope open. He pulled out the crisp, notarized pages. His eyes scanned the legal phrasing, dropping down to the signature lines and the official recording dates. The room stayed quiet. The only sound was the hiss of the radiator against the far wall. Brody looked up. The mild irritation of dealing with a family dispute vanished from his face, replaced by a cold, sharpened focus. He tapped his index finger against the thick paper. "This was recorded 24 months ago," Brody stated. "Sole ownership." "My client owns the property," Sterling confirmed. 100%. Her uncle and her brother hold zero equity, zero claim, and zero legal right to step foot on that grass. Brody looked back at the tablet. The context of the video had just inverted. He was no longer watching an arrogant heir remodel a shared asset. He was watching an organized home invasion. "They broke the lock on the back door," I said, speaking for the first time since sitting down. "They entered a private residence without the owner's consent. That is breaking and entering." I reached into my coat pocket and retrieved the folded piece of paper David had shoved through my car window an hour earlier. I smoothed the creases against my thigh and handed it to the sheriff. Brody took the paper. "Notice to evict and quit possession." He read the fabricated legal jargon, noting the lack of a court docket number and the forged signature line at the bottom. "David handed this to me directly on a public street," I said. "He used a falsified legal document to intimidate the legal property owner into abandoning the premises. He also filed a sworn affidavit with my bank this morning, using a defunct power of attorney to freeze my personal checking accounts. He claimed I stole estate funds to starve me out of legal defense money." Sterling leaned in, his voice dropping an octave, carrying the weight of a prosecutor closing a case. "Let us run the math, Sheriff. Breaking and entering, grand theft for the antique furniture they are currently auctioning off on the front lawn, fraud for the bank affidavit and the forged eviction notice, and the studio destruction." Sterling pointed a gold pen at the frozen tablet screen. "The medical equipment alone passes $20,000. The structural damage to the load-bearing wall is another $15,000. We are hovering near $40,000 in damages. This is first-degree felony vandalism." Brody leaned back in his chair. The leather creaked under his weight. He ran a hand over his jaw. He had dealt with David at town charity dinners and golf tournaments. He knew the polished, untouchable persona my uncle projected to the county. Staring at the evidence on the desk, Brody saw the raw, criminal arrogance hiding beneath the expensive overcoats. "They are running an open house right now," Brody said, glancing at the clock on his wall. "They are trying to sell a house they do not own." "They have 2 cash offers," I replied, keeping my gaze locked on his. "David bragged about it to my face." Brody stood up.
The relaxed posture of a weekend shift disappeared. He reached for the heavy black radio clipped to his duty belt. "I am dispatching 4 units," Brody announced, his thumb resting on the transmission button. "We will roll up to the driveway, clear the buyers off the lawn, and take them out the back door. We can do this quiet, keep the spectacle to a minimum." I stood up, pushing my chair back. The metal legs scraped sharply against the linoleum floor. I reached across the desk and placed my bare hand flat over the radio, covering Brody's fingers. He stopped. He looked down at my hand, then up at my face. "No," I said. The word hung in the cold air, unyielding. "If you take them out the back door," I explained, "David will spend the ride to the precinct crafting a narrative. He will call his country club friends and claim it was a misunderstanding over paperwork. He will tell the town I used a legal loophole to steal the family home. He will hire a crisis public relations firm to protect his business reputation, and he will paint me as the villain who arrested her grieving family." I removed my hand from the radio. I stood tall, squaring my shoulders, feeling the exhaustion burn away, replaced by a sharp, clinical adrenaline. "They spent the last 4 days destroying my name in public," I said. "They posted lies on community boards. They called my clients and ruined my contracts. They tried to sell my grandfather's legacy to strangers. They wanted an audience, Sheriff. Let them have one. Do not go to the back door. Turn on the sirens. Drive straight onto the front lawn. I want the handcuffs to click shut in front of every wealthy buyer and town gossip they invited to that open house. I want the illusion ripped apart where everyone can see the rot." Brody studied me for a long, silent moment. He looked at the forged eviction notice, the broken equipment on the screen, and the undeniable deed resting on his desk. He unclipped the radio from his belt and set it down. He picked up his radio microphone wired to the dispatch console on his desk instead. "Dispatch, this is the sheriff," Brody said, his eyes never leaving mine. "I need 3 marked cruisers at the front entrance of the Johansson estate. Tell the deputies to shine their boots. We are going to a real estate auction." Saturday morning arrived with a biting wind and a cloudless, pale sky. The kind of winter sunlight that highlights every sharp edge in the world without offering any actual warmth. By 9 in the morning, the front lawn of the property had transformed into a bustling marketplace. More than 80 people crowded the grass and the paved driveway. It was a calculated mix of local wealth and eager bargain hunters drawn by the promise of estate liquidation. Women in tailored wool coats held steaming cups of artisan coffee, whispering to their husbands as they evaluated the exterior of the house. Antique dealers hovered near the folding tables set up along the length of the wooden porch. A prominent real estate agency had planted a large wooden sign near the mailbox. The words "Open House" were printed in bold black letters above a clear plastic box holding glossy brochures. The front door stood wide open, leaking expensive heat into the freezing Michigan air. Inside, strangers walked through the hallways, their heavy winter boots leaving wet footprints on the original hardwood floors my grandfather had polished every spring. Ryan stood behind a long folding table draped in dark green velvet. He had appointed himself the lead auctioneer of the estate sale. Spread across the fabric lay a lifetime of carefully collected history. Silver pocket watches, engraved fountain pens, vintage leather folios, and a heavy brass compass that used to sit on the living room mantel. Ryan held a gold-plated chronograph up to the light, negotiating a price with the man wearing a thick puffer vest. Ryan laughed at something the man said, taking a thick stack of $20 bills and shoving the cash into a gray metal lockbox. He wore a brand-new designer jacket, the fabric stiff and immaculate, likely purchased the day before on credit. He looked energized, running on the adrenaline of unearned money. Beside him, the space where Chloe should have been standing remained glaringly empty. There was no one to record the sales in a ledger, no one to hand out receipts or manage the inventory list. Ryan wishes taking the cash and waving people through. Her absence was a massive hole in their united front, a silent indicator that the foundation of their greed was already fracturing from the inside. David orchestrated the larger chaos from the center of the lawn. He held a crystal flute of champagne, a prop chosen specifically to signal sophistication and celebration to the attending elite. He stood in a circle of 3 potential buyers, projecting the aura of a responsible patriarch managing a difficult family transition. He gestured toward the front bay windows with his free hand. "The bones of this place are remarkable," David told a woman holding one of the glossy brochures. "We just decided to open up the floor plan to modernize the flow. That front room used to be closed off, but we removed the interior load-bearing wall yesterday. It brings in so much natural light. Perfect for a young family looking for an open concept." He was selling them the ruins of my studio. He was marketing his own felony property damage as a premium architectural feature. The buyers nodded, impressed by his vision and his confident delivery. He took a sip of his champagne, his eyes scanning the crowd, tallying the potential profits multiplying on the grass. He belonged in this environment, surrounded by people who respected perceived net worth over actual character. The low hum of conversations, the clinking of porcelain coffee cups, and the rustle of winter coats created a steady, comfortable rhythm across the estate. Then the air shifted. It started as a faint, high-pitched wail in the distance, bouncing off the brick facades of the neighboring houses down the street. A few heads near the sidewalk turned toward the sound. The noise amplified, sharp and piercing, cutting straight through the polite chatter of the open house. A siren. Seconds later, a county sheriff cruiser turned the corner. It did not slow down to observe the speed limit. The heavy vehicle accelerated up the residential street, the roof rack flashing blinding red and blue lights that reflected harshly off the packed snow. Behind it came a second marked cruiser, followed closely by a dark, unmarked SUV belonging to Sheriff Brody. The small convoy did not park discreetly down the block to avoid a scene. They drove directly toward the property line. The lead cruiser swung its nose into the base of the driveway, blocking the exit entirely. The tires ground against the ice with a heavy crunch. The second car angled onto the curb, boxing in the parked cars belonging to the real estate agents. The sirens cut off simultaneously, leaving a ringing, heavy silence in their wake, but the light bars continued to spin. The alternating flashes of crimson and blue washed over the faces of the 80 guests. Sterling pulled his sleek black sedan into the narrow space right behind Brody. I sat in the passenger seat, watching the scene unfold through the tinted glass. The crowd on the lawn froze. The woman looking at the brochure lowered it slowly to her side. The man negotiating with Ryan dropped the gold watch back onto the velvet table and took a long step backward. The chatter died completely, replaced by the low mechanical rumble of idling police engines. I opened my car door and stepped out into the freezing air. I wore a knee-length black trench coat, structured and severe, buttoned all the way to the collar. I paired it with dark leather boots. My posture was straight, my breathing slow and measured. I did not look like the exhausted, penniless girl sleeping in a rusted sedan behind a convenience store. I squared my shoulders, feeling the crisp wind against my cheeks, and walked toward the base of the driveway. Sterling stepped out beside me, holding his heavy leather briefcase by his side. Brody emerged from the SUV, resting his right hand casually on his duty belt. 2 uniformed deputies stepped out of the marked cruisers, standing by their open doors, their eyes scanning the crowd. Whispers erupted across the lawn like dry leaves catching fire. "Is that her? The sister? Why are the police here?" David stopped talking to his buyers. The effortless, charming smile evaporated from his face, leaving behind a tight, rigid mask. A dark flush of color crept up his neck, staining his collar line. His grip on the champagne flute tightened until his knuckles turned pure white. He recognized Brody, he recognized Sterling, and he recognized the danger walking up his perceived driveway. Ryan panicked. He slammed the lid of the metal cash box shut with a loud clang and took 2 steps backward toward the front door, his eyes darting frantically between the police cars and his uncle. David set the champagne flute down on a frozen concrete planter. He smoothed the lapels of his overcoat, attempting to summon his usual domineering authority. He marched through the crowd. The guests parted for him immediately, stepping off the paved driveway onto the snow to get out of his path. His leather shoes struck the asphalt with heavy, forceful thuds. He stopped 10 feet from the police vehicles, planting his feet wide. He ignored me entirely, refusing to make eye contact. He looked straight at the sheriff, forcing a tight, patronizing smile that did not reach his eyes.
"Brody,
David said, projecting his voice so the wealthy buyers and the antique dealers could hear him clearly.
Good to see you. I appreciate you sending patrols, but we do not need crowd control for the estate sale. We have everything handled here.
Brody did not return the smile. He stood with his feet shoulder-width apart, his expression carved from stone. He did not speak. David let the silence hang for a second before his tone hardened, dropping the friendly neighbor routine. He pointed a long, accusatory finger directly at my chest. "Since you are here, Sheriff, you need to arrest this woman," David demanded. "She is trespassing on private property. I served her with an eviction notice yesterday morning. She has been harassing this family, and she is currently interfering with a legal real estate transaction. Remove her from the premises immediately." The air grew heavy. 80 strangers held their breath, waiting for the deputies to reach for their handcuffs. They expected the disgraced daughter to be escorted away in the back of a squad car. I did not flinch. I did not look at the ground. I met David's furious stare and held it without blinking. Brody crossed his arms over his chest. The radio on his shoulder clip crackled with brief static. He looked at David, then glanced at the open house sign planted in the grass. "I am not here to remove her, David," Brody said. His voice was deep, carrying no warmth, echoing clearly across the frozen lawn. David blinked. The arrogant certainty in his eyes faltered for a fraction of a second. The muscle in his jaw twitched. "What are you talking about?" David asked, his voice rising in pitch. "She has no right to be here. This is my father's house." Sterling stepped forward, breaking the line. He placed his briefcase on the hood of the nearest police cruiser and unlatched the brass locks. The metallic click snapped through the quiet air like the cocking of a hammer. The stage was set. The audience was captive. The net was ready to close. The brass locks on Attorney Sterling's leather briefcase snapped open with a sharp metallic crack that carried across the frozen lawn. 80 people stopped moving. The antique dealers, the wealthy neighbors, the eager house hunters all stood paralyzed in the winter air, their breath rising in thin white plumes. Sterling did not rush. He possessed the calculated patience of a man who held the execution warrant and felt no need to run to the gallows. He reached into the felt-lined interior of the case and withdrew the heavy cream-colored envelope bearing the county seal. He removed a stack of crisp, notarized pages. He held them up, chest high, allowing the morning sunlight to illuminate the embossed stamp of the municipal clerk. "David," Sterling said. His voice was not a shout, but a rich, resonant baritone that commanded the space. "You are currently standing on private property belonging to my client, Sarah Johansson. This is the original, recorded certificate of ownership. You possess zero equity, zero claim, and zero legal right to be on this grass." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crack ice. "You told me this estate was in probate!" the broker yelled, her voice cracked, echoing down the street. "You signed an exclusive listing agreement claiming you were the sole executor of a divided inheritance. You told me the title was clear." David opened his mouth, but his throat seemed to have seized. "There is a mistake," David stammered, his voice thin and reedy. "My father was sick. He was not of sound mind. She manipulated him. She forged that paperwork." I stepped past the bumper of the police SUV. I did not cross my arms. I did not raise my chin in defiance. I just walked toward him, my boot striking the frozen driveway with steady, rhythmic thuds. "Grandpa transferred this house to me 2 years ago," I said. My voice was crystal clear, cutting through the freezing wind like a scalpel. "He did it in secret because he knew exactly what you would do the moment his heart stopped. He knew you would liquidate his sanctuary and feed the cash straight into the slot machines at the MGM Grand." A collective gasp swept through the front rows of the crowd. The rumor of his gambling debts had floated around town for years, always denied, always buried under expensive suits and leased cars. Saying it out loud, in the middle of his own staged performance, shattered his carefully curated reality into dust. "You spent the last 4 days swinging sledgehammers into my medical studio," I continued, not giving him a fraction of a second to recover. You changed the locks on my front door, and right now you are hosting an auction of stolen goods on my front lawn. The guests holding my grandfather's belongings reacted as if the items had just caught fire. A man in a puffer vest dropped a vintage brass compass back onto the table with a loud clatter. The bargain hunters backed away from the tables, lifting their hands in the air, distancing themselves from the physical evidence of grand theft. On the porch, Ryan realized the floor had vanished. He dropped the metal cash box. It hit the wooden deck with a heavy crash, the lid popping open. Ryan did not kneel to pick them up.
He backed into the shadows of the open doorway, pressing his spine against the doorframe, trying to become invisible.
It is a fake!
David screamed, his face turning a mottled, furious red. Saliva sprayed from his lips.
She printed it off the internet. It means nothing!
He lunged forward. He abandoned all pretense of dignity, throwing his weight toward the hood of the police cruiser. He reached out with a gloved hand, fingers hooked into claws, aiming directly for the thick paper in Sterling's grip. "David Johansen," Brody said. His voice was a low mechanical rumble, devoid of any neighborly warmth. "You are under arrest."
For what?
David wheezed, his cheeks sliding against the frost on the hood as he struggled against the hold.
You are under arrest for first-degree criminal mischief,
Brody recited, maintaining the pressure on the pinned arm. "Criminal trespass and fraud." Click, click. The sound that followed was the sharpest, most beautiful noise I had ever heard. It was the sound of cold, hardened steel ratcheting through a locking mechanism. Click, click. The metal rings locked together. David Johansen, the patriarch who had banished me into the winter storm, was pinned to the hood of a police car in his own front yard, his hands bound behind his back, while the wealthiest people in his contact list watched in absolute, horrified silence. The metal cuffs locked around David's wrists with a hollow, ratcheting bite that cut through the freezing morning air. Sheriff Brody did not handle my uncle with the gentle deference usually reserved for the wealthy elite of the county. He pulled David upright by the bicep, using his own leverage to force the older man to stand off balance. The tailored charcoal overcoat bunched awkwardly around David's shoulders, the pristine fabric stained with a smudge of gray slush from the hood of the police cruiser. David's silver hair, always combed to perfection, hung in messy strands across his forehead. He looked around the front lawn, his chest heaving, his eyes wide and frantic as he searched the crowd for a sympathetic face, a lifeline, an ally. There were none. The men he played golf with every Sunday morning at the Oak Ridge Club stood near the edge of the driveway, their faces hardened into masks of sudden distance. Arthur Sterling, the bank manager who had approved David's commercial loans for a decade, stared deliberately at the ground. Mrs. Gable, the head of the local historical society, pulled her fur collar tight against her neck, turned her back, and walked swiftly toward her luxury SUV. "Brody, listen to me," David rasped, his voice thin and reedy, stripped of its usual booming authority. "This is a civil matter. You are making a terrible mistake. She manipulated the paperwork." Brody kept his grip firm on David's arm, unimpressed by the performance. "You can explain the civil nature of a forged eviction notice. An unauthorized demolition to the magistrate on Monday morning." Brody guided him toward the rear door of the second patrol car. The deputy standing by the vehicle pressed a heavy hand to the top of David's head, forcing him to duck into the back seat. The door slammed shut with a heavy metallic thud, sealing my uncle behind reinforced glass and steel mesh. On the wooden porch, the illusion of Ryan's impending wealth evaporated. Now he stood frozen near the front door. The gray metal lockbox rested precariously on the edge of the green velvet folding table. Two deputies walked up the porch steps. Their heavy boots struck the wood with measured rhythmic thuds. Ryan backed away, his hands raised chest high, palms facing outward in a gesture of desperate surrender. His shoulder hit the door frame. The sudden, jerky movement bumped the folding table. The metal lockbox tipped over the edge. It hit the floorboards with a loud, violent crash. The lid popped open. Hundreds of dollars in folded green bills and loose silver quarters spilled across the porch, rolling into the cracks of the wood and falling into the snowdrifts below. "I did not do this," Ryan stammered, his voice jumping an octave, raw with panic. He pointed a trembling finger toward the police cruiser holding our uncle. "It was his idea. I did not forge anything."
He hired the crew. I was just helping him clear it out. The taller deputy pulled a pair of handcuffs from his duty belt. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. You do not understand, Ryan pleaded, his eyes darting toward the lawn. I do not own the house. I did not swing the hammers. I just wanted my cut of the sale. He told me it was completely legal.
You supervised an unlicensed demolition crew, the deputy stated, stepping forward and grabbing Ryan by the wrist. You facilitated the sale of stolen property. You are an active accomplice to grand theft. Turn around. Ryan offered no physical resistance. His knees buckled slightly as the deputy spun him around and secured his wrists together. As they led Ryan past the real estate sign, a dark gray sedan pulled up to the curb. Chloe stepped out into the freezing wind. She wore the same heavy black winter coat from the funeral, her dark hair pulled back into a tight, severe knot. She carried a heavy, square object wrapped in a thick wool blanket. She walked up the driveway, her posture straight, her gaze fixed entirely forward. Ryan saw her. A spark of desperate relief washed over his pale, panicked face.
Chloe!
Ryan yelled, his voice cracking.
Chloe, tell them. Tell them I did not know about the deed. Call my lawyer. You need to pull the money from our joint business account for bail. Do not let them take me. Chloe did not break her stride. She walked right past him. The physical distance between her shoulder and his was less than 2 feet, but she did not turn her head. She did not blink. The disgust radiating from her silence was absolute. Ryan twisted his neck, trying to follow her with his eyes. Chloe, look at me. Do not walk away from me. I am your husband. Watch your head, the deputy ordered, pressing Ryan into the back of the car and slamming the door. Chloe stopped 3 feet in front of me. She lowered the heavy object wrapped in the blanket, resting it on the hood of my rusted sedan. She pulled the wool fabric back. It was a vintage steel fire safe. I recognized it immediately. It used to sit hidden in the back of my grandfather's attic closet. He sent the demolition crew to the 2nd floor an hour after you left the house yesterday, Chloe said. Her voice was steady, carrying no tremor, no residual panic. Ryan told them to bag everything in the closets and throw it in the industrial dumpster. I went up there before the crew arrived. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a small brass key and handed it to me. I took the key. The metal felt ice cold against my palm. I inserted it into the lock and turned. The heavy lid clicked open. Inside were 4 leather-bound notebooks, my grandfather's personal journals. Beneath the journals lay a thick, worn manila folder. It contained every medical illustration sketch I had ever drawn since I was 12 years old, the rough pencil outlines of the human heart, the detailed ink drawings he had framed and kept when my parents told me art was a waste of time. David and Ryan had smashed my professional equipment. They thought they had erased my history. Chloe had saved the very foundation of it. I filed the paperwork this morning, Chloe said, her tone clinical. The divorce petition, the legal dissolution of the catering business. I transferred my initial investment capital and locked the business accounts before he could drain them. He is going to face this indictment with absolutely nothing. I did not say thank you. The words felt too thin. I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around her shoulders. She hugged me back, her grip fierce and tight. The police sirens chirped once. The flashing red and blue lights faded down the street, leaving the property in stark, quiet relief. David was sitting in a holding cell, facing years in state prison. Ryan was staring at a felony indictment, without a wife, without a business, and without $1 to his name. The dominoes had fallen in perfect, brutal symmetry. The punishment matched the crime with poetic precision. I turned back to the house, picking up the heavy steel safe. The front door was still open. The heat had escaped, leaving the interior as cold as the winter air outside, but the deed in my pocket was real. The walls were mine, and the silence inside finally belonged to me. 30 days after the sirens faded from my front lawn, the county prosecutor formally indicted David and Ryan. The charges read like a masterclass in arrogance. First-degree property damage, residential burglary, forgery of a legal document, wire fraud, stemming from the fabricated bank affidavit David used to freeze my accounts. David's arraignment took place in a windowless municipal courtroom that smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. I sat in the back row. I wanted to see it. I wanted to watch the exact moment the local aristocrat realized his checkbook could no longer buy his way out of a consequence. He shuffled into the defendant's box wearing a standard-issue county jail uniform. The stark orange fabric drained the color from his face, highlighting the deep, suddenly pronounced lines around his mouth. His silver hair, usually maintained with weekly barbershop appointments, lay flat and unwashed against his scalp. He kept his eyes fixed on the wooden railing in front of him, unable to look at the gallery. The judge, a woman who had previously attended the same charity dinners as David, did not offer a polite nod. Her voice was clinical and detached as she read the indictment. She stared down at the forged eviction notice entered into evidence, a piece of paper that had transformed a family dispute into a state felony. She set bail at $250,000, citing the flight risk associated with the financial fraud charges. David's wife, Brenda, sat 2 rows ahead of me. When the judge struck the gavel, Brenda's shoulders collapsed. She knew the math. The estate was gone. The bank accounts were flagged for federal review due to the investigation. To afford the retainer for a criminal defense attorney willing to take a losing case, Brenda had to liquidate their own assets. 2 weeks later, a real estate sign appeared on their pristine front lawn. It was not an open house meant to showcase generational wealth, but a desperate, below-market fire sale. Brenda sold the colonial home they had lived in for 2 decades. She packed whatever fit into a rented moving truck and relocated to a cramped second-floor apartment in a neighboring town, retreating far away from the judgmental whispers of her former country club friends. David remained in the holding cell, staring at a potential sentence of 36 to 60 months in state prison. Ryan's descent was faster, lacking even the illusion of a legal fight. He could not afford a lawyer. He was assigned an exhausted public defender who took one look at the security footage of him laughing while sledgehammers tore through my studio and immediately suggested a plea deal. Chloe did not visit him in jail. She did not answer his collect calls. Instead, she sent a process server. Ryan received the divorce petition in a concrete interview room. Chloe had been methodical. The catering business, which had essentially funded Ryan's designer jackets and bar tabs, was registered as a limited liability company solely in her name prior to the marriage. She transferred the operating capital to a secure account, dissolved their shared credit lines, and severed the lease on their upscale townhouse. When Ryan was temporarily released on a nominal bond posted by a reluctant high school friend, he had nowhere to go. He ended up at the Starlight Motel, a decaying strip of rooms off the interstate highway. He spent his days sitting on a sagging mattress, watching the neon vacancy sign blink through the thin yellowed curtains. He tried calling my phone once. I recognized the motel's front desk number on the caller ID. I answered, pressing the receiver to my ear without speaking. "Sarah." His voice came through the static, hollow and shaking. "I have $14 left. I cannot buy food." I listened to the desperation in his breath. I thought about the frozen steering wheel of my rusted sedan. I thought about the $4.15 at the diner and the waitress looking at me with pity. "Ask David for a loan," I said. I ended the call and blocked the number. The irony was a perfect symmetrical circle. The legal system dismantled their lives, but I needed to rebuild mine. I did not have a hidden fortune waiting to solve my problems. I had my own 2 hands, a house completely free of debt, and a cleared name. I took out a small commercial loan against the equity of the estate to hire a licensed construction firm. They replaced the shattered load-bearing wall with reinforced steel beams, opening the space up the way David had ironically suggested, but doing it correctly. I installed floor-to-ceiling north-facing windows to flood the room with natural light. I replaced the destroyed equipment piece by piece. A new interactive pen display arrived in the wooden crate. I imported a new disarticulated skeletal model, casting the broken pieces of the old one into the recycling bin. The studio expanded, doubling in functional size, wired with high-speed data lines and customized lighting rigs. My medical illustration career, which Ryan had tried to erase with a single Facebook post, resumed with a backlog of returning clients who had read the police reports and realized the truth. The social landscape of the town shifted in the wake of the arrests. The public unmasking of my uncle and brother acted like a mirror held up to the community's own hypocrisy. The people who had eagerly typed insults on the community board, the neighbors who had labeled me a thief without asking a single question, now had to live with their own exposed gullibility. They tried to apologize, not in person, because cowardice prefers distance. They used the mail. It started on a Tuesday. I stepped onto my front porch to retrieve a package and found 3 small envelopes resting on the welcome mat.
Pastel colors, high-quality cardstock.
The return addresses belonged to the bakery owner, the contractor who used to bowl with Ryan, and a woman from the end of the block. Over the next week, more envelopes appeared, tucked into the doorframe, slipped under the windshield wiper of my car. I brought them inside and dropped them onto the kitchen counter. I looked at the neat handwriting. I knew what was inside. Paragraphs detailing how they were manipulated by David. Excuses about how convincing Ryan's post had been. Pleas for understanding, asking me to recognize that they were just trying to protect a grieving family. They wanted absolution. They wanted me to read their excuses and grant them a clean conscience, to assure them they were still good people despite participating in a digital mob that nearly pushed me into homelessness. I picked up the stack of pastel envelopes. I did not open a single one. I walked over to the stainless steel trash can in the corner of the kitchen, stepped on the pedal, and dropped the entire stack into the garbage alongside the coffee grounds and eggshells. Forgiveness is a transaction. It requires an exchange of genuine remorse and rebuilt trust. I had no interest in conducting transactions with people who only respected me once I had the power to destroy them. The silence in my house was earned, paid for in freezing nights and stolen income. I would not pollute it with empty apologies. I stood in my new studio. The morning sun warmed the hardwood floor. On my drafting table sat a silver-framed photograph of Grandpa Harold and me. The house was quiet. The deed rested secure in a fireproof safe upstairs. They thought because I stayed quiet, I was weak. They confused my grief for submission. But a property deed is not just a financial asset. It is a boundary made of steel. I did not destroy my uncle and my brother. Their own entitlement engineered their collapse. I simply stopped acting as the floor mat they used to wipe their boots on. If you found genuine strength in watching this undeniable justice, leave a comment down below with the exact boundary you are building this week. Would you have shown them the deed on the first night or set the trap like I did? Let me know. Hit the like button and subscribe to Sweet Life Drama to hear more relentless stories about turning betrayal into power. I will see you in the next video.